Welcome to Home Education Matters, the weekly podcast supporting you on your home education journey. Hello and welcome to another episode of Home Education Matters, and today is part of our mini-series Schools Out. And the whole point of this series is that it's about shining a light on some of the more negative aspects of the school system, because I think quite often as a home education community we slightly skirt around criticising the education system, and yet really realistically we've all opted out of it for one reason or another. One of the main reasons I think people opt out of the school system is because their child doesn't fit into school. For one reason or another, it might be because their needs aren't being met, or because they don't feel comfortable within the school environment, or maybe they're having difficulties with other children or the teachers. And I really wanted, as part of this series, to talk to a parent of a child who had struggled in the school system. And so I'm really glad to have Martine on the podcast today, and she's going to be telling us her story of, her child's story of his experience at the school. Is it your son?
Yeah, my eldest son, yes.
Okay, so Martine, over to you. Tell us a little bit about you and your son's experience when it comes to school.
Okay, so there's lots of details that you can go into, but I'll start the story and we'll see how far in it goes. So my son started school at when he was 4. I had an inkling within me that he wasn't quite ready for school. There was something within me telling me he wasn't ready. But there was no other thought in my head for what to do with that other than, okay, we'll just get him in there. He was always quite sensitive. He was quite shy. He was, he's lots of sort of just classic traits of a child who's a little bit more self-preserving than some of the others. And for me, that's very much character-based. It's not a label. It's not anything. It's just who he is as a person. So we were always very conscious of that before he went to school. If we'd go to new environments, we'd have to take our time with him. We'd have to move slowly, organically, authentically. My mother's intuition was always guiding me. So I was always available for him to help him with those struggles he was having. When he started school, he was very lucky that he had an incredible reception class teacher. But that's one teacher in a whole school. He really struggled from day one going into the school environment. Walking into the classroom was difficult for him. Dealing with all of the different people was difficult for him. Dealing with all of the teachers, not knowing what was going on. He found it difficult processing all the information. So we spent the first year, we kind of managed to wing it with him. His teacher, like I say, was lovely. She would bring him in the classroom in the morning. She'd hold his hand. She'd keep him with her until he was ready to go away. It was just, she was wonderful. If you can ever get a primary school teacher, she's the one you want. She was beautiful. But that's only for the 1 year. So then we moved on to the second year, and change of classrooms, change of teachers, change of compassion levels, because you're now in year 1 where it's more teaching, it's not reception class. And all of a sudden there was a completely different change, a different expectation from him. I was really aware that he was showing a lot of similarities to me of dyslexia. So I raised this with the school in year 1 and was pretty much stamped down by the school. Who said, oh, no, that's not, no, we're not saying that. And I was just like, okay, well, I feel this. I feel he's dyslexic because I feel that he's learning and he's having the same difficulties that I had. I can see it. I can feel it. Well, yeah. So he really struggled with learning to read in school, learning to write in school, learning to engage in any of the social activities. From year 1, he had his own separate room that he would go to every morning, because he couldn't walk into the classroom. He literally couldn't walk into the classroom. And so he'd have his own room that he would go into, and they would try their best to put in place a schedule for that, what he would have to go through every morning, so that his mornings were the same, so that they were repeated, because they were all shouting out, autism, autism, autism. And I'm like, I've not felt this before from him. I've not felt this before. So they were like, he needs structure, he needs routine, he needs consistency. And I'm like, okay, but that's not his structure or his routine or his consistency. You're forcing this on him. He's a smart boy. And he very quickly realized that if he engaged with their process from a certain point, he was stuck. Once he got in that room, he was stuck. And the only way he would get out of that room is by being kept in that room with a member of staff while they cordoned me out the room, shut the door and kept him in the room. It was a box room. It wasn't a big room. And he was peeled away from me. It still makes me emotional now. It's ridiculous. He was peeled away from me every day for 2.5 years. It's ridiculous, isn't it? But yeah, we wouldn't do that with our children now, would we? We wouldn't put them through that.
I think we just don't. We're in a system where we think that that's how it is, and maybe tomorrow will be better. Doing. Yeah, exactly. And we have a faith and a trust in it, don't we?
I mean, we were lucky. There was a Senko in the school who was switched on, and he very much saw what was going on with him. And I think he said no, that he's in fear. He said, I've seen him walk with his mum to school, get to the door, and then boom, this wall comes down. He said, and he can't walk any further. And he was like, he's in fear. So it was so challenging, to the point that one day we walked into the classroom and they were trying to get him away from me. And they basically built a wall of people between me and my son to keep him on the other side. But the headmaster walked in at this moment and just went, what the hell is going on? And he grabbed him and he brought him to me and he sat him down and he went, you're not leaving your mum until you're ready. It's crazy, isn't it? It's crazy how emotional this still makes me. This was, how many years ago was that now? Probably about 9 years ago now. That was.
He was 5 years old, was he?
Yeah. Yes, he's 14 now, so 9 years ago. And look how raw that emotion is, that wound. And until you go back there to that place and you talk about it, it stays there, doesn't it? And then you touch it and you go, oh, okay, that's still quite raw. So the headmaster, I've never seen a headmaster bollock teachers in front of a parent. I saw it that day. And was incredibly grateful.
You needed that intervention.
Oh, like you wouldn't believe. So we struggled through year 1. We got into year 2, and he had the same 2 teachers from year 1 in year 2, up until the November of the first term, and then then I think they went off sick, and they had a change of teacher. My son went downhill like you would not believe. Change of teacher, change of attitude, change of compassion. A teacher who was lying to us, point blank lying to us. A teacher had no idea about, not autism, but someone who was more sensory orientated, to the point that she'd been his teacher for about 4 weeks and the school were wanting us to get an EHCP because they need these things for funding. They need diagnosis for funding. So we were advised to go and get a diagnosis. We were advised to go and get an EHCP. And we went, okay, you will know what you're doing. Okay, we'll do these things. I then found out that his new teacher was going to be writing his EHCP letter referral. I went and spoke to the Senko and raised my concerns and said, I'm really concerned about this. I said, she doesn't see him. She doesn't understand him. She thinks that this is behavioural. She tells me that I am his mother. If I want him to come in school, he should listen to me because I am his mother. Bearing in mind, at one point, he was stood outside the school broken because he couldn't walk in. And this was her response to me. You are his mother. He should listen to you and he should come in if you want him to, and he should listen to you. And I sat there and I was just like, you're making no sense. So I went, okay. I walked outside and I looked at my 7-year-old son at the time and went, it's time for school. It's time to go in. Let's go. Doing exactly what she told me, knowing it wouldn't work. What did my son do? He ran down the road. I turned around and looked at her. I said, what would you suggest I do now? I was absolutely furious. She then called down the headmaster and told the headmaster that mother was having a mental breakdown. So gaslighting me entirely. And I then was able to say to them, no, actually, this is what is happening. This is what she said. This is a result of what she asked for me to do. And now she's trying to turn this round on me having a mental breakdown. So I then raised my concerns that she was the one writing the EHCP letter. And I was told, don't worry, I'll make sure that I read that before it gets sent. That didn't happen. Our first EHCP referral got rejected off the backhand of the letter from the teacher, who in the letter basically wrote, I see no issues. I see no issues other than mum delaying leaving in the morning, and that's causing the issues. So our referral was rejected and refused. Also, incidences of this same person in school. My son struggled really an awful lot to engage in the environment. So he'd quite often go off and do something quiet in a corner. One day, they have like a paper shredder in the classroom that the kids were allowed to use. And he was just there shredding the scrap paper next to it. And she came over and gave him a bollocking for using the paper shredder that the kids had been told they were allowed to use. But she's a new teacher to him. So so he went, okay, sure. And then she told him off and said he should be doing his work. And he went off and he said, I was so proud, Mum. He said, I actually did some work. I was so proud. I went and showed it to her. She took it to the paper shredder, shredded it, and told me that would teach me for using the paper shredder.
My God.
It's insane, isn't it? He was 7. 7 years.
I'm doing a series. I've just finished a series called A Journey into Home Education with somebody who took their child out of school when he was about 10. And she just sort of as part of a podcast one time, she mentioned that her son had issues with perfectionism, and then she said, that's what comes of teachers ripping up your work in front of you. And I kind of, it just slid past me in the podcast. And then afterwards I was like, wow, does that happen? Like,
it does. It does. And you're talking about primary age children that this is happening to. My son wasn't the only one in the classroom that this happened to. It was happening to multiple children. Children were going home and telling their parents. There was an incident where one child told their mother. The mother came into the school, confronted the teacher and said, can I just check this? She has told me this. The teacher looked at the child and went, oh no, that's not what happened. This is what happened. Completely lied to the parent and then walked away. The child looked straight at her mother and went, she's just lied to you. And the mother was like, well, where do you go from there? So many more, there was an incident where my son said, this is after we'd taken him out of school. He said to me, do you remember that time that I didn't want to go to school that day and I hid under the bed? And I was like, yeah, I remember that day. He said, yeah, that's because the previous day she'd pinned me to the floor because he'd been crying because I'd left him in the morning. She pinned him to the floor. I've once seen her wrap him like this to try and keep him from running out the door. He's being restrained. He's being put into freeze in his body when he's frightened and wanting to run. And so he's doing this to get her off him. He's then had it put on his school record that he's aggressive to staff.
Because his trauma response is to fly and he's not able to fly.
His trauma response is flight. He's too self-preserving. It's flight. Get out of here. She forced him into fight by doing that. Once he managed to get out away from her, he went back to the little small box room that he was kept in and kicked over a chair. He then got put on there that he threw a chair at a member of staff and he didn't. Another member of staff told me that wasn't what happened. He just kicked over a chair. So that first term of year 2, that new teacher came on board. She failed the HCP letter. January of 2017, which is the first term of his first term in that year of year 2. Yeah, second term, sorry. He wouldn't go back. He wouldn't go back in. He completely, I just said, I'm done. I'm not doing that anymore. So I've done that for 2 years and being peeled off me, and I'm absolutely done. I'm broken. I'd be walking out of the school and people saying, you okay? And I'm like, no, I'm not okay. He's broken. I'm broken. The whole thing is just destroying children. And as mothers, our intuition, our wisdom is not listened to. We're not heard. We're not seen. We're just told we need to comply. And it's devastating what they're doing. We had, in March 2017, we had what do they call them? A team around me meeting, a TAM meeting. Now, we were really lucky. The Senko at the school, like I say, was brilliant. And he sat in that meeting and he said, "This is inhumane. This can't continue." He said, "There's no diagnosis for your son. There's no care plan for your son. We cannot in any way try and bring him into this school environment without any one-to-one support and help." And he said, "This is inhumane and I highly suggest and recommend that you home educate." And I looked at him and went, "Thank you." No one tells you that. No one says home education is actually an option. It's actually something that is healthy for them. So we then went down the road of home education, and whilst also trying to get an EHCP and also trying to get a diagnosis, because we thought still at that point we'd be able to get him back in school. The EHC process was a joke. A joke. I mean, what is it? What is that bit of paper that these people sit around and write about your child who know nothing of them? We're sitting around in a room and they're making decisions about my child, and I'm sitting there looking at this piece of paper and I'm going, "That's not going to work. That's not going to work." "Oh, well, we'll just try it." I'm like, "No, you're not going to try with my son anymore. You're not trying with him. That is not going to work. You won't approve as a special needs school because he doesn't have a diagnosis. And he cannot go into any mainstream school." So when we took him out of school, we had a cognitive behavioural therapist, clinical educational psychologist, do an educational review on him. I can't remember the name of it right now. And they had basically assessed his academic ability and his cognitive function. Everything apart from his communication. He didn't talk at school, so his communication was all home-based learning. He didn't communicate at school. They said he didn't talk. Everything academic was 4 and under. He said, "I can't even give you an accurate figure because the school only says 4 and under. He might be less than that." So for 2.5 years while he was in school, he'd learned nothing. He learned nothing, but they were continuously telling me, "Everything is fine. Everything is fine. No, we don't see any issues. Well, I don't see any problems. No, everything's fine." When they were absolutely not fine. He was a broken mental health wreck of a child. He couldn't function at school. He couldn't function at home by the point of us bringing him out of school. You couldn't ask him to put a pair of socks on without a total meltdown. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't playing. He wasn't happy. So for that first whole year after him coming out of school, while we were going through all of those processes to get EHCPs and a diagnosis and all this, and he came with me to work. Where I looked after many holiday properties in Cornwall. I'd drive around them. He'd sit next to me in the car. We had a year together just sitting in the car. He just got to be quiet. He just got to rest. He just got his nervous system to calm down. And after about a year, I could see that he was starting to get itchy feet with this, and he was starting to want more than just sitting in a car. I was running a business. I couldn't not. And then it all just came to a head, the EHCP process, because we weren't finding a school that we would go to the schools and we would say, "Here is his first written copy of his EHCP, the one that's before it's formal. Can you meet his care needs?" No. Brilliant. Thank you for letting me know. Thank you for letting me know. I want to have open and honest conversations with the schools and be authentic and tell them the truth. I'd go back to the 0 to 25 SEND team and let them know that the schools have informed me that they were not able to meet his care needs. And they told me I shouldn't be telling the school about my son's care needs until he was registered and signed up, and then that would come out. And I said, "I'm not starting a school placement on a lie. If they can't provide what you're telling me he needs, then why would I progress with that and set my son up to fail?" So the whole time that the agenda was about attendance and never about my son.
it's as if were just trying things out on him. Like they didn't really care the effect it had on him. They were just like, well, let's try this and try that. I mean, it's astonishing. Like he's an experiment. They're experimenting with what would work with him without any thought for the consequences.
No thoughts for the consequence. But by the time he'd come out of school, and I'd woken up, and my from it all, that's when there was nothing that was going to get past me, because I was just like, nope, I'm not going back to how I felt back then, because you can see it. It was awful. It was awful. It broke me as a mother, as a woman. It made me feel like a complete failure. It made me feel like a failure, and it was them that was failing. I was being the one. I was the one who was feeling like I was being told that I wasn't doing good enough. Because, well, you should just be able to get him in school. Well, he should just listen to you. You're his mum. Well, he'll be all right in a mainstream year 3 setting, year 4 setting by that point, even though his academic ability is under the age of 4. And no. So I think we got to a point where the 0 to 25 team said, because you have not found a school, we're writing elective home education on his EHCP. And I said, there's nothing elective about this. There's nothing elective. I said, you can use the word all you like. You can put elective in it as much as you like. There's nothing elective about this home educating. This is because you've completely failed him, messed him up completely mentally. And also we now see, so after he'd been out of school a year, he started to smile. After a year of being out of school. And then your mother heart goes, oh my God, I hadn't acknowledged that he wasn't smiling. And then we went to a family wedding, and I was dealing with all kinds of stuff. And I just went, I'm done. I can't feel like a failure in work and home anymore. The business had to go, and I took on full-time home education. During that time, he was also diagnosed autistic. While he was going in that first year and a bit when he came out of school, when he was still traumatized and still broken, he was diagnosed autistic. During his school years, he developed tics, facial tics. He developed habits. He developed so many autistic traits while he was in school. But yet no one listened to me when I said that these traits weren't here before. So you trust a system that is trying to help you. And then you go through their process and you get to the end of it and you realize that their only agenda was to get funding for the school. So he was diagnosed autistic. We have spent the last 7 years since he came out of school doing deep trauma healing with him, helping him to repair his development. And that's also deep trauma healing for me as well, because of course I have my own childhood wounds that were coming into my parenting as well. And we did a lot of deep work with him. And he's currently in the middle of being reassessed to have autism taken off of his medical record, because they agree he was suffering trauma and those autistic traits are no longer there. Autism and trauma have pretty much the same traits. They have pretty much the same symptoms. However, trauma doesn't get funding in school.
Also, they'd have to acknowledge that they traumatized him, which I'm guessing they didn't want to do.
No, absolutely. This is it. And also the system that is there for this assessment pathway for autism assessment, that's all they can assess for. They can't assess for trauma. They can't assess for this. They can't assess. That's it. And when you find this out, you're like, as soon as we stepped through that door, there was no other diagnosis that was ever going to come from it, because that's the only objective. Get the diagnosis, get the funding.
Yeah.
So it's been a long, painful, hard road that's brought us back to ourselves through home education, that has brought deep healing, and has brought our whole family a new lease of life, of living authentically, connected, organically, slowly. Our children get to just now live their lives. They get to be themselves. They get to learn and be who they are. We just live at a nice, slow, organic pace. But as you've seen and heard, the wounds that they caused both me and my son were huge. There's never been any recourse for any of this, for the fact that they harmed my son's development. Literally, they harmed his development to a point that he was diagnosed autistic. Where do you go with that? So it's challenging, isn't it?
It's astonishing. It's astonishing to me that they could cause such deep trauma that he could end up with an autism diagnosis. And as you say, realistically, walking through that diagnosis door, it's a yes or a no to autism. It's not what is happening with this child. What about your other child? Do you have two children?
I've got 3 boys.
Did you put the others into school?
So his younger brother is 18 months younger than him. So yes, he was in school. So my eldest son is much more of a logical thinker. He's an observational learner. So he likes for things to be slower. He likes to stand back. He likes to watch. He likes to learn, but he's highly intelligent. And the school environment didn't allow for that way of being. It didn't allow for that personality. It doesn't allow for that style of learning. It's all like, no, you're right, innit? My middle son, who's 18 months younger, he is much more of a pro-social, jolly, go with the flow. He'll just follow along with anything. But what we noticed with him was that he started to lose his self, his character, because he was in an environment where he was so focused on following and fitting in that we were starting to see him change as who he was. I pulled him out as well. The younger one of the 3, he did reception class. He was miserable every morning I took him in. He hated being in the environment. He's one of those lads that he's a full-on lad. He's a character. He's the one who likes to lead the way, be at the front, take charge. So I've got 3 different character children, and none of them fitted into the school system. My younger son, he would have ended up in a lot of trouble in school. He would have been deemed as a troublemaker because he speaks out. He doesn't tolerate things that don't make sense. He will question. He will challenge. And that's not okay in the school system. So he would have ended up in trouble, and he would have ended up going down one road only, thinking that he was a troublemaker. And he's not. He's a delight of a boy. He's such a compassionate boy. He's got so much heart, but he won't accept things if they don't make sense and if they're not fair. Fair for him is everything. So I saw the impact that it had on all 3 of my children to varying degrees. The eldest has been out of school 7 years. The 2 younger ones have been out of school 5 years. All 3 of them still talk about how awful school was. None of them want to go back into that environment. None of them want to go back into that environment at all. The only thing my younger son liked about school was the meals, lunchtime. That was it. He's a foodie. He was like that. The food was great. Everything else, nah, not at all. My middle son, he didn't learn. I mean, he brought home his end of year book for maths at the end of the school year. I looked through it and I was like, is this your year's book? And he went, yeah. There was maybe a third of the book done in bits and pieces throughout it. None of it marked. And if it was marked by a peer. And there was no comments, no guidance, no support, no help. And I was like, okay, so he's not done and learned any of this year 3 maths. And you want him to go into year 4 now and go through that same process again. So what do you do in a maths lesson when you don't understand? He went, oh, we just stay quiet and wait until we can get out with it. We just literally, he said, but maths was awful. He said, because at the end, when we were asked to tidy up and things like that, we'd be tidying up. And then the teacher would come over and basically tell us we hadn't done it quick enough and we hadn't done it right. And she would empty all of the stuff back over the table and tell us to do it all over again and tidy up all over again. And I'm like, what part of this is teaching? This is power over and control and dominance over little tiny people.
That's what it is.
Yeah, because that's the only way that there's no compassion in school now. There's no heart in school. I say there's no in school for the majority. I know that there are many teachers who are driven from the heart, who are driven from compassion, but they don't have the space to do it or to give it or to see all of the children. My eldest would sit at the back of the classroom and never be seen. My middle son would be amongst it all, so would almost be anonymous. He would just be part of the crowd. And my youngest would be the one at the front leading the way, who was quite often, and one of his memories is, again, he's one for fairness. He saw a child drinking from someone's water bottle that wasn't theirs, one of his friends, and he went over and went, "Hey, that's not your water bottle, that's so-and-so, so let's go and put it back in her bag." Walking over to put a bottle back in her bag, gets caught by the teacher, gets told off, gets put in a timeout. And he's like, that's the one of his main memories from school, was the unjust in that. So yeah.
It's interesting that you have 3 boys who are so different, and yet not one of them fitted into the school environment, which says something, doesn't it?
It does say something. Yeah, the one that fitted in the best, I would say, was my middle one, the more pro-social one. But that's because he fitted in. Not because he fitted school, it's because he fitted in with that.
So he made himself fit what needed.
But he But he lost himself in the process. Because he was, all of a sudden, he was acting and behaving like all the other boys, not himself. And I was just like, it's not him. And then after he'd come out of school, it didn't take long for us to see him spring back into life and his personality come out again. So it was, it's even the different characters, the different characters that they are, none of them it worked for.
You've been an amazing advocate for your children. You have, and it's so difficult, I think, when you're involved with the education system and you have people in positions of authority, because we are born and brought up to believe that we should listen to them and trust them. And so it's very, very hard to unwire that part of our brains. And, and yet you stood up and you took your eldest out, and now all 3 of them are thriving at home, which is an amazing testimony to you.
Thank you. It was a fight. I spent 2 years in fight mode, which is not healthy. And my partner would at times be like, just try and tone it down. And I'm like, no, there's no toning down. Because I would be in meetings, and but now he sees it. Now that we've gone through all the trauma healing, and in a relationship, we've done a lot of healing as well. He's just like, I can't believe how much you've been standing up and fighting, and I've been like more worried about how people are judging you than what you're doing. I'm like, I don't care about judgment. I don't care how people judge me. But if I'm in a room and there's some people who are speaking and saying, we're going to do this, you're not going to do that, because that's not going to work. I guess the one advantage that I had is that prior to becoming a mother, I worked in special needs schools for a very long time, looking after lots of autistic children. It never felt right for me, the autism. And which is why I kind of questioned it. But I thought, well, okay, we'll go with this process, because maybe they're right. Maybe as his mother, maybe I'm, being a bit led from my heart and not my mind. I don't know. So I've sat in many meetings, professional meetings with educational authorities, and looked after children and advocated for the children who I was caring for a long time prior to becoming a mother. So it made it very easy for me to step in and be confident in those meetings, and not let them just walk over me, my intuition, my partner, and my son. Because we live in a society where mother's intuition is so ignored and so suppressed. And that is a huge problem, because until we start listening to mother's gut intuitions again, this is just going to keep going downhill and downhill. And we're going to end up with the next generation. What's the next label that we're going to bring in? It was autism, was the popular one. Now it's ADHD. There will be another label that comes out in the next generation that becomes the buzzword. And I'm not saying that ADHD and autism aren't real in there, and that they're all based in trauma, because they're not. But ADHD, again, the symptoms to that and trauma are the same, but they don't assess for trauma and they don't diagnose trauma, because no one ever asks anyone what's going on with inside them. No one ever asks how they are inside. What was your life like? What was your childhood like? What was your home life like? No one asks these. So we just have boxes in this structural patriarchal system where it's like, right, we need to tick this and this and this and that. There you go. That means you're ADHD. Completely missing the humanity from it all. Completely missing the human side, the connection side, the relationship side of family, and seeing how that's impacting it, seeing how environments and school environments are impacting it. It was never acknowledged, never even talked about throughout the process. Was how was he dealing in school? That must be having such a big impact on him, being peeled away from you every day. He literally was screaming every day. It got to the point where he was running out of the school. He'd go and press the button so we could get out the door and he'd run out, which of course in a school that triggers all kinds. I mean, I was there the day he did that. That triggers all kinds of weird security things in a school when a child does that. And all of a sudden I saw these large men running out of the school towards my son, and I stood in the doorway in front of them. I went, "Do not touch my son. Do not put your hands on him. He is not going to run away. He's not a threat. He's not going to run into the road. He's running away from you. Stop." And they just looked at me and went, "Are you mum?" I went, "Yes." And they listened. They didn't put their hands on him, because if they had done, they would have, if they'd have done that, I don't know what would have happened after, if I'm honest. I don't know. But they listened, fortunately. And I just said to him, he's not going to run into the road. He's not a stupid boy. He's a smart lad. He's aware of his environment. He just doesn't want to be in here. And you're treating that like it's like that's a crime. Why aren't you listening to that? Why aren't you listening to the fact that a child can't walk into your school building? You know, and he said to me one day, he said, "I don't trust her now anymore. She tricked me today." She said, "Because when she took me round to the playground to go and play on a bike to try and change his mindset, I was still in the reception area and they said, 'We'll bring you back to mum so you could say goodbye.' I was then told to go. And then he was like, 'Where's my mum?' And they went, 'Oh, she's gone home.' And he was like, 'You've lied to me. You told me you were going to let me say goodbye to my mum before she left. You lied to me.' So he had no trust in any of the teachers. He didn't feel safe there because they were physical to him. And he wasn't learning. His development was impacted. And he ended up with traits of autism that was actually deep-rooted trauma.
One of our podcasts in this series is with a trauma expert. And as part of the podcast, she talks about how important it is to heal the parent trauma as well as the child trauma. And I wonder if you're able to give our listeners some advice when it comes to healing the trauma that comes as a parent from witnessing your child's trauma.
Well, I thought I'd dealt with it until today.
Trauma has a habit of popping its head back up, doesn't it?
You think, well, it managed that. But until you step back into the feelings and into the place, you go, "Oh, okay, that's still there." And it's still here. That's where it sits, right along the chest. So it's still there. But unless we were to go back into a new school environment and heal the experience, we're not healing that. We're not healing it fully. We're just avoiding that environment. Not because we're trying to avoid, not through avoidance, but because we're not going to go back into that environment. We're not going to go back into an environment like that and try and heal a wound that was caused by such a barbaric system. So that wound is something that I will just keep sharing. I'll just keep allowing for that emotion to move through. The deep healing that we've done with our eldest son and as a family has also rooted back to my childhood and my partner's childhood. We've done a lot of deep healing, and it's hard, heavy work to unravel ancestral wounds that impact us. And I could see how my ancestral wounds had caused that sensitivity in my son that I acknowledged before he went to school he wasn't quite ready. those difficulties that he had in different environments, the sensory side of things that he had. I could see how the way in which I mothered and nurtured him impacted him so that his development wasn't quite ready by the time he went to school. So whilst the school had a major impact on him, I don't know if he had been fully developed by that age, whether it would have gone on and been so bad. I don't know. I still think it would have been because of who he is. And also my other two children had a different version of a mother because they're my younger children. They didn't have, it's like my eldest son says, I was your practice. And we're like, sadly, yes, you were. But you have also been our biggest teacher. You've also been the one that has guided us to this life, because you wouldn't just accept, because you wouldn't just go with the flow, because you wouldn't just tolerate, because you wouldn't just be a good boy. You have guided us to a much healthier life than we would have done had we just continued down that road. Now, I do feel very fortunate that we were able to home educate, because I know that that's not always an option for parents whose children are suffering. But what about that? What about all those children who are suffering because they've got parents? To be honest with you, I don't come across many parents who don't have childhood wounds and generational trauma that's not impacting them. So how many children are then starting school with their development impacted and then going on and going through the school system and being labelled and being sanctioned and being put into seclusion and being punished and being beaten down even more than they already have, perhaps have been, in an environment that should be based around education? And it's cruelty. It's just cruelty. But if their parents aren't able to do what we were able to do, what happens to those children? Because the school system is not holding them, it's not keeping them safe, and it's not helping their development in any way, shape or form.
When you think about your eldest son and the journey that he has been on since he left school, what do you think is the number one thing that has helped his trauma recovery?
Autonomy. Total autonomy. We just said to him, because the other thing that they were looking at stamping on him was, what do they call it? Pathological demand avoidance. And I could see what they were saying, but I'm like, but that's a survival system response. That's not a label. We're labeling survival system responses. So we just said to him, there is no pressure on you to do anything. You can stay in your room 24/7 if you want. You do not have to go anywhere, do anything, unless it's your choice and your decision. I spent a couple of months sleeping in his room. I spent a couple of months sleeping. His bed was, he had a cabin bed. I'd sleep on the floor and he'd sleep with his head just over his cabin bed so he could see me. And he struggled with his sleep, as a lot of children who have difficulty in school do. And we just said, it doesn't matter when you sleep. Don't worry. I'm here. Just sleep when you sleep, wake when you wake, and it's absolutely fine. And it took him 2 weeks before he came. He was 7, 8 at the time, maybe no, 9. No, he was 9. It took him about 2 weeks before he would come down and he joined me on the bed that I'd made. It took another week before he would feel safe. And this is a reflection of my parenting. It took him 2 weeks before he would then feel safe to lie in physical connection with me and get back to feeling physically safe in his home environment. Because our home environment was chaos. We were struggling for 2 years of him being in school. There was shouting, there was chaos, there was arguments, there was anger, there was emotion, and it was raw. And he was terrified at home and at school, because I was so pressured trying to get him into school that his home became horrific. So it took about 3 weeks of me sleeping in his room before he felt he could feel safe around me, his mother. It's quite heartbreaking when that happens. But what happened then was like a switch. I'd healed a deep-rooted wound of lack of feeling safe in his life, in his brain, which is connected to our baby brain. That first part of our brain that's online when we're born, the bit that's all about mother in arms. That's where safety, that's where we learn safety. That's where that feeling, that deep-rooted feeling of safety comes from. And when that feeling is impacted, we need to go back to being held. When someone's not feeling safe in their life, what underpins a lot of ADHD, people not feeling safe, so they're in chaos. What underpins many of the autism diagnoses, lack of feeling safe in environments. So they have lots of, that safety comes back to here. Now, again, that's not saying that all ADHD is because of that and all autism is because of that, but it's saying that this is part of it. But this is part of what the patriarchal structure is not acknowledging, is that the importance of mother-child has been removed. Put your child in nursery really, really early on. Get them in school, put them in more before school club, after school club. Basically, we want your children to not be at home with you. And that's having a devastating consequence across the board. So going back to that safety, that babe in arms, once we'd healed that and we'd clicked this switch, it's like he then came alive. And all of a sudden he was growing and healing, and we were able to have more deeper conversations about emotions, and we were able to talk through his experiences to the point where he one day said, I think I've worked out why I find getting to sleep difficult, because it's triggering my abandonment wound from when you would leave me at school. Mm. Mm. When you get to that point with your child, you're like, yes, we've done it. We've done it. We've got there. So it's been a long, hard journey, a very, very long, hard journey. And my children will never go back into state education or any form of education like that.
It has been a long journey, but it's one that you've all made together, and it sounds like you come through the shining light at the end of it. So Martine, thank you so much for sharing that story with us. It's so important, I think, that we shine a light on this kind of story, so that people listening who are maybe going through this or who have been through this realize that they're not alone, and that there are people who have experienced this as well and have come through the other side. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing it with us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's a painful road, one where you feel you're fighting, but there is light if you can turn around and look the other way.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's Home Education Matters podcast. See you at the next one. Have a lovely day.